And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're taking a look at a game called Fickle. Now, Fickle is a game that looks like, when I first saw it, actually when I first saw it I thought it was called Tickle, but it's Fickle. Anyway, when I first saw it I thought this game looks like it was almost based on the artwork, and I still feel like it looks that way. The artwork done by Amy Brown, a bunch of different fairies. You can see the cover's really pretty, the rule book is even prettier. Just these pictures of fairies, and this is a game where you're going to take 5 groups of fairies, shuffle them together, and play a game where you're trying to get fairies from different alliances or fairies from different groups of fairies to join your alliance so you can score the most points. It's actually a pretty quick game. Let me quickly explain it. In this game, players are going to be picking from multiple different fairies to build a set that you're going to play the game with. So, for example, the example game, I picked 5 different sets here. We have Give, Coerce, Blind It, Transmute, and Deflect. So, if you put Coerce and Give in all these, there's going to be a deck of each of these. You'll shuffle them together, and you'll have a deck. Each player is going to draw 3 cards from that deck, and you're going to pick 2 of these to start in front of you. So maybe I start with this Deflect of 1 and a Give in front of me. The rest of the cards are shuffled and placed down here as a draw deck. Now, just to be clear, once a card's in front of you, it doesn't mean anything other than what family it's from and what its points are, with the exception of a few fairies. At the end of the game, you're going to score. If you have only 1 fairy in a family, then you will score the points. So this is 1, 3, this is 4 points. If you have 2 fairies of the same color, at that point you score 0. So now I would have 3 points. If you have 3 or more fairies of the same, then you'll pick the highest value there and you get negative points. So I have 3 minus 4, now I have negative 1 point. But if I get 5 or more of the same family, at that point I can add them all together, but I get nothing else. So 5, 9, 13, 14, I would get a total of 14 points. Now, the game itself takes place over 5 rounds. And in each round, you just move this piece around this deck here. This keeps track of the round. You're going to put 5 of these tokens out randomly, and they just basically indicate the direction of play for each round. In each round, the first thing that you will do is you'll flip the token here to see what direction you're going. You'll resolve any delayed effects, if there's any effects from the previous round. You'll deal each player 3 cards. Those players will then look at the cards, stack them any way they want, and pass it in a direction that's shown here, putting it in front of that player. Each player then is going to essentially pick the top card and decide whether they're going to keep it or not. If you don't want to keep it, no choice, take the second card. If you don't want to keep that, you can discard it, but then you're stuck with this card. While if at any point you decide to keep the card, then you keep that card and you discard the other 2 or whatever. Once that's done, after everyone has done that, you're going to go through the fairy powers starting from 5 to 1. So anyone who has 5 goes off first, anyone who has 4, etc. And the powers will do different things. For example, this says take a fairy from your alliance and put it in an opponent's alliance. Maybe I have 2 of the same color. I'd like to give you one of those. Coerce is the opposite. Take a fairy from an opponent's alliance and put it in your alliance. Deflect, you can play when someone does something to you. You can redirect direct power to a different opponent, or be invisible to a chain effect. Blind It, this happens next round on a delayed part, where it says during the fairy selection you must choose to take or dismiss the top card without looking at it. And Transmute says pick an opponent, they discard the fairy that they have in their hand, and then they draw a new card from the fairy deck. And there's all sorts of different fairies that come with this game. So let me show you some of the examples here. We have Erase, where you pick an alliance. They have to put that in a discard pile. Illusion is a wild fairy. Scheme, take the fairy with the highest value from an opponent's alliance and put it in your alliance. Dispel, just get rid of one of the fairies. Here, when targeted, place the target and one other fairy face down. Shuffle them, and your opponent gets one as a final target. So there's all sorts of these that you'll play with. After you've gone through all 5 rounds, you'll score, just like I mentioned, following the scoring card. And then whoever has the most points is the winner. So a few things that are interesting about the game. I really like this big token here that they give you to show you what direction turnaround is. The little ones here work really well. This board has two sides. This is what you do once you know how to play the game. It's a much prettier side, and they have this kind of, if you want to see what every single round does, you use this side. And when I saw it, I was like, I'm never flipping it to this side. But honestly, after going through the game, I think 2 rounds, everyone had it memorized. Now, the artwork on the cards is absolutely gorgeous. Now, they use the same piece of art on all the numbers of each type, which is fine because it helps keep you, it helps you know which types are which. And they have just different cool art, and every one is a slight different shade of color, and they also have symbols on there to help you remember what they do. The box itself, you can keep them all separate like this. It has this piece of cardboard middle, which isn't actually completely lined up, and for a long time I sat there trying to figure out if I was supposed to put it in this way or flip it the other way, and I think I got it. But either way, the components for the game are really quite good. The rule book, I should have also mentioned, is fantastic. Really does a great job explaining the games, explains all, I think there's 20 different fairies in here and what they do, giving examples, talking about, gives you some recommended sets of cards to play with. It's just really well done. So just fantastic. This artwork may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I really like it, and I think it just brings the whole game together. As I said at the beginning, it is a fast game, very quick. There's a couple minor problems I have with it. One is the fact that there's only 5 fairies in the game, and there's a certain number of cards for each fairy. There's 1 5, 2 4s, 3 3s, something like that. You have to shuffle a couple times over the course of the game. I would have preferred there to be no shuffling, so I would have preferred there to either be more cards per fairy, which might have thrown off the numbers that are in the game, and or play with more fairies. Like, I almost wondered at 6 fairies if that would be a bad thing. And again, I know that would throw off the whole balance of the game. I just didn't want to shuffle a couple times. And there's a few fairies, like the Mimic Fairy, for example, which copies another fairy, which aren't as interesting in a 5 fairy game, because if you have 5 fairies and 1 mimics, then there's only 4 powers to pick from. So I felt like, or there's one that blocks other fairies, and if there's only 1 fairy that attacks, it's just not as interesting at that point. So there's a couple fairies that I thought would have done better if more fairies could be in it. But I would have to, there's a lot of math involved there, so I wouldn't want to mess necessarily with the design of the game. Those are very minor though, and at the end of the day, the game is really quick. The one mechanism, which just is really fun, is the fact that you set the cards up for the next person. And of course, you can table talk. I'll be like, listen, I put the best card on top, take it, and don't go down farther than that. Now, sometimes you don't have a lot of options. You might draw 2 of the exact same card when you're giving them to the other person. But stacking their deck and then kind of taunting them, you definitely, you better go down to the bottom. That's where the best card is. It's just an entertaining thing, and you're trying to outguess the other person. Sometimes you draw the card and you're like, this is the card I want. I don't care what you say. So you got to be careful not to set the other person up for that to happen. But it's entertaining. It's definitely a bit of a take that. I'm stealing stuff from you, giving stuff to you, and you know, sometimes the score is really lopsided, like 20-2. But I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it's 20 minutes, it's fast and fun, and it has a lot of replayability because you can pick so many different groups of 5 fairies. And it's pretty, it looks good, it's easy to teach. It's just a really solid production. I think sometimes I get on a lot of games' cases because I'll say that the game is good, but at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, well, you can tell this is a little weird in these spots and the components here and stuff. No, does a great job teaching you the game. It is easy to teach. It's fast to play. It feels different. Yes, there's a lot of fairies out there in games, but this one has a different feel to it because they picked the theme and stuck with it. So I like it a lot. Definitely one to check out, especially if you're looking for a smaller game, a small, shorter game, but one that has a lot of replayability. You'll enjoy Fickle. Dice Tower Judgment, pretty. Oh, also approved.